Good afternoon, everyone. We're just getting everyone let into the room and we will begin momentarily. Hi, everyone. We have a fairly large group today for this presentation, so we're just going to give another couple minutes for people to join and we'll get started shortly. All right, welcome everyone to the Mastering Built Green class today, featuring equity and social justice credits. Just some quick housekeepings. We request everyone to mute themselves and keep their videos off during the presentation. Katrina will be placing housekeeping items in the chat if you would like to review them, but please know that we will be addressing the majority of the questions during the Q&A at the end of this presentation. And if you need to have anything clarified during the presentation, please address it in the chat and state that it's a clarification question so that Kayla can potentially get that clarified sooner rather than later. And with that, we will get started. Again, you may enter your questions in the chat now or write them down. We will address them at the end. So as people get settled in, we'll get started. So just to start this presentation, we'd like to set some common language of belonging. These are terms that we are using in our equity and social justice credits. And we'd like to start by just setting the basis of language and how we are discussing certain communities and populations and terms, just to set that kind of equal stage. So we start with spaces of belonging. Spaces of belonging are really places of physical and psychological safety that convey a sense of belonging within a group or community. These are places where you are not only physically safe, but you are also psychologically safe to express yourself, to be yourself, and to say what you need to say. Equity in our, the shared definition that we are using is a system of fairness with equal access to opportunities, power, and resources so that all people achieve their full potential and thrive. Social justice, it requires a fair distribution of access to public goods, institutional resources, and life opportunities for all people. Structural inequality is really when it occurs when the fabric of organizations, institutions, governments, or social networks contains an embedded bias which provides advantages for some members and marginalizes or produces disadvantages for other members. Underserved communities, we define as community groups who have consistently and historically been impacted by inadequate services and limited access to opportunities. Marginalized populations are groups and communities that experience discrimination and exclusion because of unequal power relationships. And lastly, we use a term and an acronym that is BIPOC, which stands for Black, Indigenous, and People of Color. This is typically used in reference to communities or groups of people. So the big question of today, along with just understanding our credits, is why equity and social justice and why now within the Built Green program? Hopefully, most of you are aware of who we are, Built Green. We are a residential green certification program used in Washington State. We developed this program to be utilized across Washington State. Our specific team administers the program in Western Washington. We are a holistic program, so equity and social justice are just a natural part of a holistic system. But we'll get into more specifics now. So a quick history lesson. We really looked at multi-factors of why we wanted to really codify equity and social justice into our program. We have had accessibility credits and other design credits that addressed some equity components previously, but the new section really takes an intentional step to take that even further. So one of the many factors that led us to this decision is a historical perspective. For example, in the 1930s, here on the left-hand side, the Homeowners Loan Corporation was an organization tasked to essentially map out and carve up cities for their investment potential. They really dictated where funds went for home loans, capital investments, and infrastructure improvements. They judged neighborhoods based on racial and socioeconomic makeup. And so in this map, I know it's difficult to read, but really what you want to pay attention to is the red and yellow sections. The red sections of the map of Seattle were classified as hazardous. The yellow zones were classified as declining. What that really meant is that lenders would not want to lend money or provide capital to those areas. And this was a practice that is now known as redlining. There was also some zoning by discriminatory zoning practices as well associated with this. And this all kind of led to some bigger issues, which we'll get to in a couple slides. So diversity is this middle map. This is really a map of Seattle showing the neighborhoods with the highest diversity rates. And as you can see, the red and yellow of the map on the left from the 30s really overlaps and correlates with areas with high diversity rates in our city. Now, we have made a lot of progress from legal standpoints to provide legal barriers to discrimination for lending practices. However, there are inherent systematic issues within these institutions and structural racism that is still occurring and bias in all of these institutions. Now, that is not to say that we haven't made progress, but as you can see, the map that was redone in 2015 by the City of Seattle looked at a risk factor index for, specifically, they called it displacement risk index. This index looked at multiple factors and kind of gave an overall index based on multiple factors on this one map. So those factors looked at the vulnerability to housing cost increase and the ability to find new housing, access to necessary services, future development capacity based on zoning, and median rent cost. As you can see, the places with highest displacement risk are the kind of red and orangey spaces on this map. And as you can see, even in 2015, it still correlates with these diverse communities of color within our city. So we are still seeing the impacts of redlining and discriminatory zoning practices and lending practices still today. Environmental racism is another concept where it refers to institutional rules, regulations, or policies within a government or corporate system that deliberately target certain communities for locally undesirable land uses and lax enforcement of zoning and environmental laws. This tends to look like consequences of building a dump in a or a large transformer, electrical transforming field next to communities of color or other marginalized populations. Another big one you'll see are Superfund sites located near Indigenous populations. What this really leads to is direct corollary to health outcomes and socioeconomic outcomes. In the state of Washington, we have this. We recently are working on the HEAL Act, which is to directly help combat environmental racism in our institutions here in the state. That's working its way through the government now. But what this really map looks at is where you live determines your health and what pollutants you're exposed to. This also then correlates and has a ripple effect on your economic opportunity outlook, educational outlook, and just overall income, socioeconomic income opportunities. So when we look at exposure to pollution based on race and other marginalized populations, you can see that Latinx, Latino, and Hispanic Americans really are exposed to a much more significant pollution rate, and this is environmental pollution. Same with our Black American community members. Non-Hispanic white Americans, as you can see, have a much lower consequential environmental pollution exposure. It would be also interesting, and something I should note, that Indigenous populations are not on this map. And like I mentioned, there's somebody who needs to mute their mic, please. Thank you. So another thing that is not on this particular graph is Indigenous populations and the amount of pollution they are also exposed to. So I would expect that to be high as well. So zooming into Seattle again on this environmental health disparities map and bringing up the diversity map again, you can see that these areas of diversity in our city also correlate with a lot of these areas of high impact to environmental health disparities. So this is, again, an impact of systematic discrimination and actual structural flaws in our system. So this leads to some known disparities among our BIPOC communities. Food deserts, food insecurity, we've already kind of looked at displacement risk, lack of affordable housing, housing segregation, which also leads to educational segregation, lack of affordable, accessible transportation, poorly maintained infrastructure, lack of investment in that infrastructure, higher proportion of income spent on utilities, poor indoor air quality, among some other, and all of those things associated with exposure to pollutants and poor air quality, and higher risk factors for health consequences. Another thing that has changed significantly in the last several years has been also a rise in hate crimes. They have seen triple-digit rises in the number of hate crimes that are based on race alone. And this is greatly impacting our BIPOC communities. And this study here that you see was conducted in 2019. And so with the recent stories and the news we've seen in the past 16 months or so, it has only probably significantly increased from there. We were inspired by a lot of the passion and demonstrations and movements that happened in 2020, along with the very difficult images and videos and things that were happening in our country and the world. We saw movements on pay equity. We saw movements on police brutality and systemic racism issues and all the social impacts that those have. Again, these populations suffer from a lot more disparities because of some of these issues that have been just a part of their lives for so long, that we were inspired to take action and help our community to do so as well in a positive way. So what we're looking at is really that our society right now, as it stands, is really on this far left side in what we call reality here in this picture. Certain parts of the population and groups are getting more resources than others to do similar activities and have the similar opportunities. So equality is not necessarily, giving everyone the same thing is not necessarily appropriate given our structural and systemic issues that we have and the bias that's still in our institutions. So our goal is really to move towards this equity component as a transition to support people where they are at in the situation they're in and provide them the necessary resources to support them, to give them the same opportunities that other people have and other communities have. The ultimate goal is to reach a point of justice where those systematic barriers are taken away and everyone starts off at that equal footing with the same opportunities and possibilities. So that is our ultimate goal, is to move through equity and into a situation where we don't have those barriers and can reach a point of justice. Built Green has codified this intention through this process. We are codifying the intent to address equity and social justice in the residential building community across Washington state. And we are the second green building certification program to directly address it with required credits. So I'll go over the process we went through in developing these credits and really developing the section. First, we started with an internal review. we really wanted to look at what is the checklist currently kind of focusing on, and what is the program focusing on. So our checklist, because it was built primarily around the environmental kind of conservation movement, it really is heavily focused on environmental aspects. So resource conservation, environmental management, pollution prevention. It also looks at some social aspects, so standard of living, indoor air quality, homeowner education. And it also looks at the kind of cross between the two, where we look at local materials and really looking at local economies through that material lens. Where the program really focuses on is really finding those energy efficiencies, creating and working with jurisdictions to create subsidies or incentives for being efficient with resources, to conserve resources, and ultimately to build green homes. The economic wing of our program, really, we are a builder member organization, so we are here to serve our builder association members. So we do focus on the profit, the cost benefit analysis of these checklist items, the strategies, and ultimately making sure that whatever they are building is profitable, because the primary group of members and users of our checklist are for-profit builders. So we do a lot of research and development to share strategies, to share these best practices, to provide growth in our industry, as well as those cost savings that we can find through these projects. However, ultimately, we want to be fully in the sustainable sphere and cover all of these issues. So we would like to include workers' rights and fair trade and fair wages, and raising social standards of everyone who gets to live in one of our homes or who gets to build one of these homes. So the overall intent of this section and this process that we went through was to create those spaces of belonging, not only for people in their own homes, so they can feel safe and comfortable in their own homes, but so that people can go to work and work in these fields and in the construction and building industry and feel safe to express themselves, to be who they are, and feel that they are supported to find the highest opportunity that they are hoping to seek. Ultimately, we are focused on increasing awareness and discussions of systemic inequality and injustice within our residential building and homeownership realms. We want to really focus on education at this point, and really building that awareness and having those difficult conversations to bring knowledge and just more information to people around this topic. We want to increase opportunities for economic advancement for marginalized and underserved communities to, again, support them and bring them up. We want to provide practical and positive ways for our members to act in this space. And through that, we want to support and reward and empower architects, builders, and developers in their efforts to promote equity and inclusion, one project at a time. And through that, we hope to lead a transformation in our community through a culmination of many projects and the impact they can have overall on our local systems. So just to clarify our scope of influence with this program. Typically, our program influences the design through commissioning phases of a project. So we really focus on those. That's sort of our scope of influence, that we feel we can impact projects. Ultimately, that means that it's the developer and builder are responsible for the final certification. So we really view it as anything that's within their realm of control. We can try and help them figure out ways to act in a way that is of value to them and the community at whole. Unfortunately, sites, which is a large part of the conversation, are typically selected for economic viability and not based off of our credits. We do give credits for site selection to encourage those type of sites, but typically that's more of a bonus rather than a decision factor. We also don't really address zoning or zoning policies in our program. We try and work with jurisdictions to create more incentives rather than trying to address zoning. Our government affairs team with Master Builders Association of King and Snohomish County are great, and they are working on zoning issues and densification and infill projects, but that is not our realm. We do not have influence over owner selection or final sales price. So, once the builder leaves the site, that's pretty much where the Built Green checklist ends. Now, we can influence homeowner education so that they provide homeowners knowledge on how the house operates, how to maintain the house, and how to live in the house, but we don't have influence over that price structure. We wanted to really take advantage of the fact that we have an established history of practical, educational, and prescriptive approach to credits. We try and make it so that even if you didn't have a handbook, you could probably read the checklist and understand about 95% of what you would need to do to build a green home to meet your sustainability or value goals. So this is not something that we needed to create a new wheel. We just needed to find a wheel that fit our vehicle. And so we did a lot of research and found a lot of inspiration in things that are already being done in this space. So one of the big inspirations was the King County Equity and Social Justice credits and their scorecard. That is designed for capital projects. So we really utilized a lot of the concepts that they introduced, but needed to find a way to basically scale it down and break it down into steps or pieces that were more applicable to our scale of projects rather than multi-billion-dollar projects. We took inspiration from Built Green conference presentations and the speakers that were involved. We really picked their brains. We learned from them, just like our members do as well. We did some stakeholder engagement along with all of this. We looked at public and capital project hiring requirements. So there are already some equity and social justice hiring practices that have set precedents in the public realm. So we use those as inspiration. We also looked at affordable housing definitions and how there are multiple kind of tiers and different definitions for types of affordable housing. And we utilize those to sort of build the definitions and expand that concept. We looked at projects that are happening in our area or have happened. Africatown Plaza in Seattle is a community-wide multifamily project that includes affordable housing, community amenities, and was developed with very high stakeholder engagement with that community. And we thought that was very inspiring and took a lot of elements that were utilized through that process and as inspiration for some of the credits. The Hilltop neighborhood redevelopment in Tacoma was also an inspiration source. The company Forterra is working on that. And they really are doing a high stakeholder engagement with that community. And it's a full neighborhood redevelopment to make sure that they are minimizing displacement, including the local economy, the local community members, to really design a community that works for the people there now and into the future. So it's a very inspiring project. We also looked at other certification programs. Now, there's not that many, so really we looked at the Living Building Challenge, who is a very forward, far-thinking organization and certification program. And they actually have an equity pedal as part of that challenge and that structure. So we also looked at kind of where they were, having an impact as well. So part of that stakeholder engagement, we put out this checklist and we reached out for feedback, not only to our Built Green Executive Committee, who is made up of like public and private sector partners, both within our organization and outside of our organization. We spoke with our verifiers and got their feedback. And we also put this out to members of Built Green to elicit feedback if they had any. We also engaged with outside stakeholders. So Weld Seattle is a nonprofit equipping system impacted individuals with housing, employment, and resources to successfully reintegrate them back into society. And we found their work to be something that we wanted to support and to have others sort of know about. So we really worked with them on certain hiring practices that we could try and implement to not only support their style of mission, but to support the people they're trying to work with. Africatown, we actually we met Whitney Lewis from GGLO through the AIA Diversity Roundtable group. And she introduced us to the Africatown project group. And that included Aaron, Baruch, and Simba here. And we really picked their brain on how can we engage community stakeholders, what are some considerations, and they really helped us a lot with certain credits, especially in the multifamily realm, and just coming up with things we hadn't thought of. So it was a great working group. Nori from King County was the principal designer of the King County Equity and Social Justice program. So we really talked to her about how to understand those credits, what the intents were, so that we could do that process of breaking them down into pieces that we could then utilize. Patricia Lally, also known as Patty, who will be in our Q&A session later, is the founder of Racial Equity Works. And her organization works with other organizations and institutions to develop, strengthen, and support a commitment to deepening an awareness of race and social justice. And she really was our consultant and really helped us write all the handbook narratives so that we could find the right language for us to be authentic and to address, a sensitive topic in an appropriate manner, and to use the latest language we could find, because this is an ever-evolving conversation. So we wanted to make sure the language was correct, but also authentic to our organization. So the last thing I'll say about the development of this section is that we were aiming for progress and not perfection. Not every credit is going to be perfect. We may have missed credits. Our checklist is a living document, and it does get updated every few years. So as the conversation changes, or as the society changes or the market changes, we can change this document. When we learn more, we can update it. If we had been aiming for perfection, we would have been doing this forever and nothing would have ever changed because we would have never released it. So we aim for progress in this space, not for immediate change or immediate impact to solving an issue. We are just trying to support people trying to do the right thing and to try and bring down those barriers in our scope of influence. So I'm going to pause here and give Kayla a chance. Is there anything I need to clarify before I move on?
So far, you're good.
Okay. This also allows me to drink something. All right. So now we'll get into the nitty-gritty of the actual credits. So here's the summary. So the The equity and social justice section for single family is 46 credits. For multifamily, it's 56. The total points available. Now, this does not include any sort of calculations on credits that may exclude one another or just not be feasible to combine, but just a pure total number of points. You have 255 for single family and 343 for multifamily. We will mostly be covering the single family version because that's what's written and released. However, the multifamily credits, those additional 10 credits, really only change a couple things. One, the affordable housing credit performance requirement is based on a percentage of units because you're dealing with multifamily units versus a single family home or like a townhome project. The other additional credits are based in community connectivity for transit-oriented design principles, and they're fairly easy to interpret. Providing subsidized bus passes. Many of the credits are brought in from a previous version. They just got moved into this section. So most of those community connectivity kind of transit-oriented ones are pretty self-explanatory. So I decided not to cover them today to save time. Additional stakeholder engagement credits and post-occupancy evaluations are also included in the multifamily checklist, just because they have a larger impact on a community as a whole because they just have more housing units and they have a larger footprint. So that's where kind of the differences fall. Almost nearly all the 46 credits that are in single family are replicated exactly on the multifamily checklist. So if you understand these ones, you'll be able to apply them to a multifamily project. So just like our other sections in our checklist, our star level, we have requirements. For this, you'll notice if you're familiar with the checklist, most of our sections require 3-star is like 40 points and our 5-star is around 90 points. And so those are sort of like the main sections, what they are required to earn. So you can see it's a much lower threshold and requirement for equity and social justice. And that is purposeful because we are looking at, using this to educate and have people just start to address it. And in the future, we will probably raise these requirements as the market changes and as systems progress and companies just become more used to these practices. So for 3-star single family, 15 points is what's required to be earned. 4-star is 20 points with the inclusion, so not in addition to the 20 points, but of those 20 points, you also need to earn the credit that is related to a project-specific equity and social justice plan. So every project that is 4-star and above is required to develop a project-specific equity and social justice plan in addition to any other credits they want to earn. 5-star for single family is 25 points. And then for multifamily, you can see there are a little bit more per star level, but again, that's because they're larger projects with larger sort of footprints and impacts, which is also why we also give them more credits, like number of credits and options. One note to clarify is the multifamily checklist is still under pilot. We are kind of wrapping up the revisions on that soon. And so these may change, but it's probably unlikely the requirements will change. The credits themselves might kind of get tweaked here and there. So like I said, each star level needs to meet that previous threshold, but they're not cumulative. So if you're doing a 4-star, it's not like 15 plus 20, it's just 20. So the section is broken up into subsections that really look at, we kind of bundled certain topics together and certain impacts. So we looked at project team And the way the rest of this presentation is going to go is we are going to look at each of these subsections and look at specific credits that I feel are a little bit more nuanced or may have more questions on than some of the more self-explanatory or easily understood credits. And if you have any questions on those other credits that I don't have included in this presentation, you're welcome to bring them up during the Q&A, or you're welcome to email us afterwards, and we can certainly discuss them further. So project team, that is really looking at who is represented on those design and construction teams, how are companies and teams equipped to address this area of topic, equity and social justice. Overall design is really how does that design address and contribute to creating more equitable and just communities. Universal design is focused on designing elements that increase accessibility, inclusiveness, and community connectivity. Those are the universal design section most people will recognize because a lot of those credits were in previous checklists. They just got moved. Stakeholder engagement is looking at, the integrated design and community engagement to enhance design and streamline the construction. So it is a benefit to both the builder and the community. Proactive sourcing is the intentional sourcing to provide opportunities to understand often overlooked communities and businesses. So this is really being intentional with where you source and who you hire. Advancing economic justice is increasing career and economic development in underserved communities and increasing those opportunities for homeownership and equity building that are just sort of missing a lot in some of our BIPOC communities. So to delve a little deeper into the project team section, the section intent is to expand representation on design and construction teams. We're looking to build relationships with partners who share, mission-driven values or similar values to both Built Green or your own organization. We're looking to expand and explore a variety of perspectives and bring those perspectives into the design and construction communities and how we develop projects. We're looking to create employment opportunities for underrepresented populations in the AEC fields. And ultimately, we're looking to equip companies and teams to address these topics and focus on continuous learning and improvement. Like many life skills, you are never done learning about it, and you always have room for improvement. So one of the credits I'm focusing on here is our expanding the stakeholder involvement to create diverse teams for equitable development and culturally enriched spaces, while expanding interest in capacity building among priority populations, consultants, and in-house staff. So the way that you can really, the performance requirement for this credit to really earn the credit is to build a diverse team representing multiple viewpoints and perspectives, and then document the steps you took to build the team. What perspectives did you add? How did that team approach benefit the design and construction process? So it's analyzing how, a diverse team really benefited the project. We offer different points for different levels of, project diversity. So if you have a diverse and inclusive design team or construction team, you can earn 5 points. 10 points is if both of those are inclusive and diverse. And if you additionally involve some sort of community member or the homeowner, you can then get the highest tier of 15 points. These can be combined with credits for integrative design process and engaging local community groups in the stakeholder engagement section. So you can see these we tried to build a lot of synergies between credits to make them kind of build upon each other to provide pathways to really increase the impact of a certain action. Another one that I wanted to focus on is developing an annual equity and social justice work plan to focus internal and external equity efforts. So this is the credit where you're looking at your actual organization or your company and how it's operating in this space. So it's an annual work plan to identify equity action steps that will impact your entire business. Within your business team, you'll work to develop a work plan that prioritizes that year's activities. You can utilize all the credits in our section as a starting point for possible plan elements. So a lot of these credits can provide you ideas of what you can utilize in your company to build this plan to earn the credits. You want to tailor this plan to focus on specific elements that are feasible in 1 year, while accounting for all the daily pressures and tasks that your business, team members have to deal with on a day-to-day basis. So you want to be realistic in what you're actually going to be able to tackle so that you can be successful in the end and not have a scenario where you planned for 10 items and you got 2 done and it feels like a failure, but really those 2 were impactful, and that's something to learn from and build from. So just think about, feasibility but also make sure it's meaningful. The requirement for this credit is to document and manage that work plan, including its calendar year, the action items, the time frame, and other critical information that you need to sort of measure or track progress. We recommend a Gantt chart or any other project management kind of chart you feel is appropriate. But action items should include measurable outcomes to determine success. We recommend using a SMART goals format. SMART is specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and timely. It must be reviewed and updated annually for the duration of the project. So if you are going to earn this credit and your project takes 2 years, you will need to show 2 work plans that progress through those 2 years. If using the plan over multiple projects and checklists, which you are allowed to do, it should document progress or completion of items with each time you're submitting it with a new checklist. So in the example of like a 2-year project, you could submit it, like if you build 10 units, you could submit it 10 times, but each of those times you're submitting it, it should show some progress on that Gantt chart or whatever tracking mechanism format you're using. It's worth 5 points. And it can be combined with a number of implementable credits. So if you're going to use credits from our checklist, it can be combined with that as long as you implement those credits. So what's an example of what like an action item looks like? So an action, like here's an example of what you can include on this organizational work plan. In year 20, whatever year you want to state, we will provide a combined total of, again, however much money you feel is comfortable or meaningful for your organization, worth of pro bono construction services to 2 nonprofit organizations for projects located in BIPOC communities. So that's your action step. Then you're going to describe, so how are you going to implement it? So you're going to identify team member, Joe, Barbara, whoever, will identify potential nonprofit organizations and meet with them to discuss possible contracted work. Once the projects are selected, they will then reach out to our trade partners and vendors for possible participation in build events or in-kind donations and materials. So you can see, if you're familiar with any of these type of projects, imagine Habitat for Humanity or Rebuild Seattle. Like, this is sort of a format that you could use for that. You're going to track it. So team members will report progress at monthly management meetings and update on resources needed for those projects. And then you're going to review. So within 60 days of completion of each project, we'll review the success and challenges, of the projects, the partners, and the opportunities for improvement to inform the next project. So that's what you can include for a step. We don't require you to have any number of action items in a work plan. This is purely what, this is subjective to your organization and what your abilities and scope of management are. So moving on to overall design. So the intent of this section is develop an understanding of overall design and how it can address and contribute to creating more equitable and just communities. Its intent is to really help you build a palette of ESG action items that can be efficiently and effectively utilized on projects to increase their equity and social justice impacts. So what I mean by that is just like energy efficiency or design palettes that are sort of like a go-to menu of options that you might be familiar with using. That is what we hope to accomplish with this, is if you go through this process, over time, you will develop a list of items that is comfortable and feasible and something you can efficiently and cost effectively implement on every project or throughout your organization. So you're not having to constantly spend additional time learning how to do things or finding partners or building relationships. This is something that is just another process of business. And it'll be a palette of solutions because not every project is going to facilitate the same credits or action items. We want to expand affordable housing options, so we provide credits that are giving points for a variety of housing types and affordable definitions. We want to also design to counter known disparities while reducing displacement risk for at-risk communities. So it's not just something where you go in and you build this awesome house in a at-risk community, which might unintentionally lead to displacement because now housing prices are more expensive or the people who live there can't afford to purchase that house. You're actually designing to help the community while trying to minimize, what we know as gentrification or displacement. So one example of a credit that I pulled out is developing the project-specific equity and social justice plan and identifying priority elements. So it's not just a plan, but you need to identify like what is meaningful, what is something we intend to accomplish on this project. It is required for all 4-star and higher projects. The intent of this is to really increase awareness and consideration of possible actions and impacts a project can take to create those spaces of belonging and advance those values of equity and social justice. Again, just like the organizational work plan, you can utilize any of the ESG credits as possible plan items or elements or action items. But you want to tailor the plan to be specific to that project. So is it feasible on that project? If the site is located in an area where you can't build a stepless front entry because of grading or something, then obviously that's not something that should be included on the work plan. If it's like physically infeasible or like economically infeasible, or you just don't have resources to do that item, you shouldn't put it on your list just because you need to fill space. It should be thought out, either with the design team or within the construction team or both, ideally. You can even use the integrated design process and get your, other subcontractors and other stakeholders involved, and they can help you kind of figure out, like maybe having community meetings to figure out where that is best, where that meaningful impact is for the project. So the requirement is, it needs to be a plan that is on the developers or general contractors letterhead, similar to the organizational plan. It should be specific action items that include measurable outcomes. It needs to have a responsible party for each action item. Anticipated completion timeline, project phase. Again, a Gantt chart would work great here. You want to identify and highlight priority equity efforts. The reason we're asking you to highlight those priority items is so that the team can go back to them and say, what did we really want to accomplish? What are the priority meaningful impacts that this project can have? If we did nothing else, if we weren't able to accomplish everything on the list, what are the priority items? Again, we recommend the use of SMART goals to write those action items. So an element that could be utilized on a project-specific plan is in the year 20-something, we will seek to diversify by 20% our subcontractor and or vendor pool to include women and BIPOC members. You'll identify a team member, Joe, Bobby, Sue, whoever. We'll identify potential subcontractor vendors and meet with them to discuss possible contracted work. Tracking, you'll track the subcontractor contracts on a quarterly basis to see how you're progressing in that 20% diversification metric. And each quarter, they'll review the progress and report back to the project team and adjust purchasing or recruitment strategies to meet that goal. And then, at the end, you could review as well to see how it could inform the next project if you either met the goal or didn't meet the goal. So now we get into a credit for implementing the plan. So if you implement any of those items, although we do have a minimum, if you actually take the step to implement that plan, using a Gantt chart or other project management, you can track those implemented plan items, provide a short explanation for any action items not implemented. So were there, logistical, economical reasons it just didn't happen? The point breakdown is kind of broken out by if you only implement the priority elements that you highlighted, you can earn 7 points. But if you implement all the items, you can earn 12. Or if you calculate the local economic and equity impact of those implemented actions, regardless of how many you implement, it's called a local multiplier. LM3 is the acronym. If you calculate that on any number of actions you implemented, you can earn 12 points. So it doesn't just need to be the priority elements. So after you've made the plan, implemented the plan, now you should review the plan to inform future projects, and we'll give you credit for that. So you want to conduct an internal review of how the plan was implemented. You can apply this to either the organizational plan or the project-specific plan. So if you only do an organizational, you can conduct a review on that, or you can conduct it on the project-specific. If you do both, it's the same points. So you're going to measure successes or challenges of implementation to inform those future plans and actions, learn from them, evaluate the effectiveness of the actions taken and who benefited from those actions. Were they actually meaningful to that community? Did it actually address something that they needed to be addressed? Consider actions that are not included that could be valuable additions to the next project. So maybe through this process, you realized, well, actually, if we did this instead, we would have a bigger impact because we could provide more food security. So those are all things that could be included in your review. You're going to document those findings of the internal review with the goal of creating that palette of effective elements for future projects. So this is sort of helping to get you through the process of figuring out what elements and what actions work for your company and your development portfolio. Overall design. Furthermore, are you citing, designing, and constructing to counter those known disparities identified through the engagement of community stakeholders? So you're going to engage with the local community stakeholders to identify challenges their community faces or missing amenities that they really would like that would help them. Discover meaningful remedies or solutions to include in the project. You're really trying to build relationships through stakeholder engagement, not just listen to somebody and then do what you were going to do before. And so finding those like solutions that maybe you can find common ground to utilize should be meaningful and help build a relationship that you can keep going back to. So you're going to document the actions taken to counter at least 3 of those known disparities and the outcomes of each action taken. These, again, can be combined with many other credits in the checklist listed here specifically. So some of the community connectivity and the inclusive design credits would feed into being able to say that you've countered known disparities in a community. As a refresher, these are the known disparities. So any number of things can be utilized to address this. Even synergies between our indoor air quality and energy efficiency credits, like a use of an HRV, could help with indoor air quality issues, or use of low VOCs, or carb to, no added formaldehyde products to support indoor air quality and reduce asthma occurrences in people with poor air quality outdoors. So there are a number of ways that this checklist can help you address these disparities. The key is that you need to actually, talk to somebody in that community to figure out what's the most meaningful ones. What are they most troubled by? Is it indoor air quality? Do they have really high childhood asthma rates? Or is it that they need food production spaces so they can, have better food security? Is it displacement risk and they really just need affordable housing or some sort of thing that isn't going to make it so they can't afford to live there anymore? So talking and figuring out, which disparities you can address and which ones are meaningful to the community is what's key here. So here's a sample of how all of these implementation credits can combine. And just through the process of developing a plan, implementing, and reviewing a plan, you can earn a total of 27 possible points. So when when we looked at the requirements, a 3-star project is 15 points. 5-star is 25 required for a single family project. Just writing a plan, implementing a plan, and reviewing a plan. Now, the implementation part is going to earn you more credits as well. That all can be combined to 27 possible points alone. That's before you get into the actual implementable items, and that will earn you more credits. So we really tried to build synergies between the credits to help assist projects to do more. So universal design is a fairly hefty section. It's the one people are going to really recognize because it includes a lot of credits, accessibility credits, and like transportation credits that were included in previous versions. So it's really looking at designing and building spaces that are universally accessible to a broad range of human abilities and life stages. We're looking at multi-stage design that minimizes the need for extensive changes, when people's life stage changes. So as they age, as they get kids, as kids move out, design that can be flexible. It allows homeowners to live in their homes longer and in their communities longer, to have people who want to visit them without having accessibility issues of getting to the front door, or move around their home if they want to visit. And increasing community-wide amenities that serve to increase safety, walkability, and function. So these are sort of these are your stepless front door entries, your accessible bathroom credits, all of those sort of accessibility credits that many of you are familiar with. The star level required points may not exclusively come from this section. We do want you to use other credits. So you may not meet your star requirement by just only earning points from universal design. So that is one caveat to keep in mind. Universal design, one I wanted to pull out because it's a little bit more, it needs a definition, is designing a low maintenance outdoor space. What that really is focusing on is landscaping that's slower growing. It's native or drought tolerant with perennial foliage that doesn't need to be trimmed and pruned and stuff every season, or needs to be replaced. It doesn't, it's something like the picture here. It's easy to maintain. It's long-lasting hardscapes, and minimizing the need for sealants and stains. So think of it as something that, like, a lot of people who are busy may find it helpful because they just don't have time to spend outside, or maybe they don't have the financial ability to like maintain something all the time. It could just be also ability, so age. Maybe they're older and so they need something they don't have to like work at all the time. So these designs that don't apply are designs that greatly reduce permeable surface area through like impermeable liners, artificial grass, or compacted decomposed granite. Those sort of designs are not applicable to this because it's counteracted all our other site and water designs. So you want to really focus on things that are low maintenance, but not completely sealing off the surface for stormwater purposes and heat island effect. So our stakeholder engagement section is really focused on relationship building that can provide opportunities for workforce development, neighborhood support, new friendships, and just a greater awareness of our world, our communities around us that we may not live in or experience on a day-to-day basis. We want to increase support for builders and developments while decreasing positive negative impacts of those developments. So again, displacement risk in some of these communities is very high, and we want to try and avoid that while serving those communities and increasing their opportunities and healthy homes and home ownership opportunities. But we don't want to just build something and have the negative sides of gentrification happen, where we just displace those communities instead. Note of caution, asking community organizations and community members to donate their time and energy without some recognition of their investment will not help future relationship building or engagement. That's another form of resource extraction, is to ask and ask and ask and either not listen and actually implement anything they suggest, or to ask and ask and ask and they never really get anything out of that relationship. They don't get recognized. Your local community organization that you might work with to engage with these community folks can help you figure out pathways to recognition or compensation, which may or may not be money related. It may be something else entirely, but you would want to work with them to figure out an appropriate pathway to recognize the time and resource they're giving you. So engage with a local community group to assess community needs, inform the specific plan, your Built Green checklist, project goals, or your overall equity organizational plan. So possible engagement activities, many of you are familiar with these. So you can conduct a community needs assessment to inform a project or development strategies you're looking into. You can seek feedback on the project or organizational plan. Like, is that plan going to be meaningful impact to that community that you're trying to, build in? Seek feedback on, more feedback on how their past projects have been received by the community and any unintended outcomes. So again, it's if you've already built there, you can go back and ask, like, how is your company or your projects being received by that community? Is it positive? Is it negative? Or were there just unintended outcomes that you didn't see? Maybe they were positive, maybe they were negative. Who knows, unless you ask. So that can help also your future plans on how you proceed with projects in the future. Document the type of community engagement, the group you engaged, and the outcome of those activities. So what were the actual things that came from that activity? Not just, I met with such and such group on this date. We would like to know, was there something that came out of that meeting that you actually acted on? So the next, second to last section is our pro-equity sourcing, which is really looking at intentional efforts to build capacity and diversity and inclusion in the construction industry. It focuses on the suppliers, the vendors, and the hiring of subcontractors and laborers to create lasting and mutually beneficial relationships. So we're not trying to ask you to get new suppliers and new vendors every project, but if you find vendors that you maybe have never worked with that also support equity and social justice in the grand scheme of things, you may end up building that relationship and they may become one of your Rolodex contacts when you call and you need materials or labor or work. Providing economic opportunity to marginalized communities and populations, specifically women and minority-owned business enterprises. System impacted individuals like through Weld Seattle, and women in the trades. These are historically sort of underrepresented community members in our industry and the design community. So project specific are what these credits are focused on. So you don't necessarily, for a general contractor who is the person listed on the the checklist, this is going to be project specific credits, and they are applicable to the general contractor and the first tier sub direct reports and hires. So it's not like if you're a small development firm of and maybe you mainly just do the project management side, but you're the overall general contractor and builder, your all of your first tier subs can help you earn these credits. If, for example, you have a smaller managing firm with more subcontractors who actually do the building part of it. And most of it is built based on labor hours. So an example is hiring workers and apprentices who reside in one of the 43 priority hire zip codes. This is example of King County. Other jurisdictions, other counties have equivalent lists of economically distressed zip codes. They typically meet the following 3 criteria. People living under 200% below the federal poverty level. There's a high unemployment rate, and there is a large sector of people without college degrees. The minimum to earn this credit is 25% of all work hours, regardless of labor classification. So it could be laborers, it could be craftsmen, it could be plumbers, administrators, marketing folks, anyone that's working on this project. If they reside in one of these zip codes, then you may count them towards this credit or their hours. Each percentage of 25% gets you more points. Advancing economic justice. So the section of this is to really broaden recruitment and hiring functions to include people of color and other underrepresented communities impacted by bias and discrimination. We're looking to improve diversity and upward career movement for those same populations, increase the value of skilled employees by training them and retaining them and increasing your retention rate as the business grows. We want to also increase access to homeownership and equity building for our BIPOC community members. And many credit actions can be applied to multiple credits over a calendar year. So a lot of these ones are not necessarily project specific. You can reuse them on multiple projects or multiple checklists over a calendar year. So for example, this one here, partnering with organizations or financial institutions to create pathways to investment and homeownership, especially for individuals and families facing the most pressing disparities. So this is really looking at trying to increase homeownership and real estate investment opportunities for BIPOC community members, developing partnerships and programs that facilitate support of BIPOC-owned real estate or development projects. So some examples of this, and this is a very open-ended, situation where if it fits the intent, you can use it for this credit. So an example might be homeownership and purchase workshops and consulting services for people who may not have access to those type of services to help them figure out, are they in a place financially to be able to afford a home? What kinds of homes can they consider? What are the implications of buying a home and all the costs associated with new home ownership that they may not be thinking about? So all of these, and then education on just, how do you finance or how do you mortgage a home? And what's appropriate for them. Create investment pathways for impact investors to direct their investments into affordable housing projects. Hopefully within BIPOC or disadvantaged, marginalized communities. So that's one way a developer could interact in this space as well. Develop a multi-unit project with Habitat for Humanity or similar mission-driven affordable housing organization, because they specifically for Habitat for Humanity, they have a unique homeownership model where the homeowner needs to actually participate in the build process and provide sweat equity as part of the home building experience. So that is a different sort of pathway to allow community members to purchase homes that they would not otherwise be able to potentially afford. So I wanted to provide you some very quick examples of how these credits can be implemented on a kind of scenario of a project per star level. So and I will say that going through this process provided me a lot of insight into, you can do a lot with universal design credits, and to get to a required star level, you don't even need to use them. But if you did, you can get there really quickly. So I actually avoided those because most people are familiar and already doing a lot of those practices. So those will just be almost like bonus points to these scenarios to give you a buffer, or just additional points towards your overall star level. So for a 3-star scenario, we're going to be looking at credit 1-1, which is a modified version of our previous credit, where it's building relationships within our Built Green community by sourcing and using Built Green member services or products. So in this case, this builder purchased lumber from Dunn Lumber, and Dunn Lumber actually has a lot of social and equity work that they do. And so on their website, they do list some value statements and activities that they do to increase equity and social justice through their operations. So they would be a qualified member that you could utilize for that credit. And that would get you 1 point because it's 1 point per member. The next one is offer equity-focused trainings and workshops to your staff, subcontractors, or other building partners. So in this scenario, the GC offered unconscious bias training to their staff. And it does require 100% of that GC's staff to take that training within a calendar year to be able to earn the credit. So we're assuming that all of their staff in this scenario took that over the last year. And they earned 5 points for that. They had a stepless front entry and a stepless access through the garage of this home that we're building together. And that was worth 3 points because it's 2 points for a front door and 1 point for any other entry. They designed to promote and encourage pedestrian-friendly and safe neighborhoods. So in this particular project, they did not have a fence in the front yard. They had bicycle access through the garage, and they planted street trees in the courtesy strip. And those are items in the handbook that you can earn points for. So they did 3 items off of those 5 that we have in the handbook, so they earned 3 points. Then the last thing they did on this project was they participated in our MBAKS Rampathon event. So they were able to get this credit for providing pro bono and substantially reduced rate services and resources of trainings to a nonprofit or historically marginalized community organization. So while MBAKS is not a marginalized community organization, the Rampathon is providing ramps to people who cannot otherwise afford a ramp to their home so that they can get in and out of their house. Typically, these are people with disabilities and limited income. So they earned 5 points for that. So through just these few actions, they earned a total of 17 points on their checklist for ESJ, which is above the 15-point threshold. So for a 4-star project, they developed a racial equity vision, mission, and values statement and prominently displayed it on their website. To do this, the GC held a staff meeting to discuss their shared vision, mission, and values within their company. And then they developed them into company-wide statements that they then publicly posted on their website. Because it's a 4-star project, they were required to develop an ESG plan that included actions from this chart that we're seeing here, as well as some universal design credits. Like I said, there's more that can be implemented than just on this list, but we're just focusing on this. So for that plan, they earned 3 points. They also did some stepless front entry and had a stepless entry through a shared parking area. And so they earned 3 points for that. They were in a urban growth area, so they're going to get points for that in Sight and Water, but here they were located near a bus line, so they earned a transit stop credit, as well as they were in an area that had a walkable neighborhood where they were located within 6 essential services within half a mile. So they earned 3 points for that. Then they also chose to work with Weld Seattle, which is credit 1-36, and hired, and 25% of their temporary work hours on the project during site clearing and demolition, they utilized Weld Seattle employees to do that work. So they earned 5 points here. And they were required to get 20 points. And as you can see here, they earned 22. So 5-star. So what this hypothetical project did is they diversified their team. And this was a project hypothetically built in Rainier Valley. So they created a diverse team that included BIPOC members that could lend their perspectives on designs that could honor the historic values and address known disparities represented in Rainier Valley. So they earned points for that. Then the plan that they were required to make included measurable action items that could be implemented. These included some of these credits as well as some universal design credits that were in addition to these. Then they furthermore actually held a meeting with some community stakeholders in Rainier Valley and identified a couple different strategies to counter known disparities. So they provided raised food garden beds, they installed HRVs in their airtight homes, and they provided pedestrian-friendly front yard design. So through those, that process, the stakeholder engagement, and through these tactics and strategies, they were able to earn 15 points. They provided raised beds, so that got them a community connectivity point under universal design for providing a raised bed in the courtesy strip. They also, through that pedestrian-friendly front yard design, also earned the credit for designing and promoting pedestrian-friendly neighborhoods, again, like the similar project. And then lastly, they chose to have 25% of their project work hours provided by employees who resided in priority zip codes. And that earned them 5 points for a total of 27 points. And it's worth it to note that they would actually earn more than this because they could also get 8 points additional for the stakeholder engagement itself. So they would be well above the 25 points required if they had gone through this process on a potential hypothetical Rainier Valley project. And these are all single family kind of implementation examples. Multifamily would be similar aspects. So lastly, I'm going to wrap up and say there are many more resources available for you to look at. We provided resources for each credit in the handbook here. MBAKS is exploring training opportunities that we can offer builders to participate in, but those are forthcoming. We haven't developed them yet. However, education team does have a list of training resources that you can ask them for if that's something you are interested in. We also have a forthcoming multifamily handbook that will cover those additional like 10 multifamily credits that are not already included here. And then also our Built Green verifiers who are on this call getting educated as well. They will be a really good first contact. And if they can't answer your question, they will certainly ask me and report back to you. You can also email us directly if you have specific credit questions or interpretation or implementation questions. We're happy to answer those. And with that, I'm going to take it to our big Q&A. So I'm going to stop sharing now.
All right, well, thank you, Sonja, for that presentation. If you don't know me, my name is Kayla. I'm the Built Green coordinator over here at Built Green. We welcome you to turn on your cameras and use the raise hand function so we can call on you if any questions that you have, or if you don't feel comfortable with that, you can also put them in the chat box here, and Sonja and Patty, our consultant who helped write the handbook, will answer your questions for you.
Yeah, and I'm going to invite Patty to just introduce herself real quick. Thank you for joining us today.
Hello, Sonja. This is Patty Lally, and I'm happy to be here. And I was so excited to see all the different opportunities that individuals, contractors have, designers, architects have to improve racial equity in the world in which they work and live.
Great. Well, Kayla, why don't you start us off with a question?
Yeah, so you kind of brushed up on this a little bit in the beginning, but there was a specific question that was brought in beforehand. Is Built Green working to address zoning and land use laws to have impacted BIPOC communities disproportionately?
Yeah, so unfortunately that is outside our scope. We do not, that is a bit outside of our program sort of activity space. So we typically focus on incentives to get green homes certified or built, or like working with utilities to try and figure out rebates. We don't typically work on zoning issues. That's more our GA, our government affairs team's activity, and they do a lot of work in that space. We have affordable housing, I'm forgetting the actual word, but coalition or partnerships around that. They are also working on infill zoning issues and other things. So we don't take on that. We let our government affairs professionals handle that.
Perfect. So I had a question come in directly to me. Can you give some extra clarity about what qualifies as attainable housing?
Yes, so we have it defined in our handbook, and I'm going to try and do this by memory. So attainable housing is generally if a person who has a household income between 80 and 120% of AMI. Workforce housing is between 60 and 120, it's a bigger range of AMI, and then affordable housing is defined as the rent or mortgage must not be more than 30% of their household income, and they're generally capped at 60% of AMI. So it's more on like what that person can afford. And we expanded those definitions to provide more opportunities for builders to gain points and be more supported in their efforts to provide under market value houses, but maybe not as far as, you know, traditional affordable housing.
And then we did have Helen Harrison say that the NAACP local chapter is working on zoning issues in Seattle specifically. So there's also that there. Let's see, we had another question beforehand. How does this ESJ section change the design of spaces?
So we kind of have different ways of designing spaces. So ESJ looks at certain accessibility features of a house and trying to inform design so that they fit multi-stages rather like with flexible spaces or movable parts or maybe partitions that can be taken down or remodeled fairly easily versus like extensive additions or remodeling. In our materials section, we look at reducing materials through open floor plans. So that's another way that it also touches on accessibility, but its intent is more along reducing materials through reducing walls. But another unintended outcome is that without those walls and those open floor plans, it provides more accessibility for folks.
All right, so far I don't have any more questions coming in. Does anyone have any additional questions that they would like to ask Sonja or Patty or anything related to ESJ?
And feel free to raise your hand, turn on your mic, ask questions. We'd really love to see faces of who's talking about these issues. So if you want to turn on your cameras, you can do so now. The rest of the session is really going to be an open discussion on whoever wants to ask questions, project-specific questions even. So go ahead.
So I just had a question come in as you're speaking. So with the implementation example for the previous slide with 1-2 that showed the hiring of BIPOC employees to provide equity initiatives for projects, is that written into 1-2 requirement or 1-2 requirement? Would this lead to a sort of gamification via the point system and tokenized of BIPOC people?
Patricia, do you have thoughts on that one?
Sonja, I'm not sure exactly what the correlating sections that was being referred to, but you know, providing living wage jobs is so important to all people, but particularly for BIPOC community, because for so many years, for decades, perhaps centuries, BIPOC members have not been awarded the opportunity for living wage jobs in the same manner or in the same capacity as their white counterpart. So not only does providing job opportunities and training and access to jobs improve the construction industry, it also improves the community where those projects may be being developed. And certainly for the prioritized zip codes, it goes a long way in providing access to jobs, which then impacts other systems that would otherwise be another burden. So I hope that kind of comes close to that question. I don't think it's tokenizing when we hire individuals, train individuals, and offer people living wage jobs.
Yeah, and I'll add, in that example, I looked at the question a little bit further here. The implementation example of hiring people specifically for that project may or may, it depends on the intention. Are you hiring them and not listening to them? Like, that's not the intent of the credit, and that wouldn't really be, indicative of that. Now, the other option is maybe they're already on your team and you just choose an internal project team to make sure their perspectives are in that team rather than going with it, the same project team that you would use in Ballard or Fremont or Northgate or something. So really looking at who's on the team and who has perspectives that can help in, really bring the perspectives you need to hear for those communities. I also just want to say, like, we're not asking quotas or anything like along those lines of hiring specifically like a certain number of people is not how you get into that earning of that credit either. We're not advocating quotas. We're not advocating any sort of certain percentages. It's more about, are you bringing differing perspectives and diversifying your team to bring benefit to the design or the project to impact equity and social justice? And that could look like a lot of things. It doesn't have to be race. It doesn't have to be, we want to focus on race because that's a big, huge issue in, our community at large and our systems, but it may not be representative of the community you're trying to impact. So it's all about what the intent of that impact is.
All right, thank you for that. So we had another question come in as well. So for credit 1-2, what defines diverse teams? Is it based off a certain percentage of the team being BIPOC?
So that's sort of what I was getting at. I think it really depends on the company, the intent. It's Patty, correct me, it's going to be sort of subjective, right? To each team, organization, a design team addressing something in Eastern Washington may look very different than somebody doing something in King County.
Absolutely. And what I encourage clients to strive for is to create places of employment that reflect the community in which you serve, the community in where you live, and to think about bringing in individuals that will broaden, will enrich the organization. And that creates a lot of flexibility. I encourage people to look at their own lives and to think about whether they live and whether their circle of friends, of acquaintances, actually reflects that diversity as well. And if your own personal space in your own life, if you don't have a diverse and enriching groups of individuals that you can draw from, that is a great place to start, and to bring that curiosity, to bring that passion to your work site, to your company and organization.
All right, does anyone have any more additional questions that they would like to ask Patricia or Sonja? Oh, looks like we have one more. So for credit 1-10, it only lists WMBE and MBE. Do WBE not qualify?
Yes, sorry. I think in my rush to put everything, anything that is sort of a state certified, sort of recognized enterprise can qualify for that credit. We just primarily focused on women and in the state's terms, minority owned enterprises. We typically tried to stay away from the word minority because it's losing place in the conversation. But that's a state-run program. We can't really change the language of that. So we did focus primarily on those ones, but you could do a WBE, WMBE, MBE, all of the acronyms.
All right, does anyone have anything they'd like to add? Any additional questions, last minute thoughts?
So Patty, do you have any just general recommendations for folks in this space who are kind of starting out?
Sometimes starting out, it seems daunting because we're creating a different way of operating. We are having to think through how to satisfy these requirements. And so I encourage you to take baby steps. And sometimes when we take baby steps, we are able to learn and to incorporate smaller steps into our business practice a little bit easier than if we try the perhaps a more daunting, a more challenging requirement. So one is to take baby steps, and two, to give yourself the opportunity to try something, and maybe that wasn't the right strategy, and to actually think about what went right and what you would do differently again. And then finally, to reach out to Sonja and her team, because they're going to have tools and suggestions and advice to make your path easier. I hope you take the steps.
Yeah, and part of this process is being vulnerable, to being open to learning something new and maybe finding out that what you thought was wrong or misinformed. Patty and I, through this process, had these conversations of sort of like, why race was the big part of this, these credits, and not trying to include everything else. Obviously we focus a lot on disability and, different ables within design, but with strategic hiring, we really wanted to address race and that social justice aspect, because it's such a large part that impacts so many people and so many systems. So, learn. That's what this, that's why we didn't make a huge requirement. We wanted to force people to do a little bit, but nothing outside that, the realm of, that they would turn away from the program and say, nah, it's too hard. It's designed to be educational. It's designed to get you started and to give you ideas, because sometimes it's just, where do you start? We'll start with 1 or 2 actions. Mix in a couple outside of universal design and start seeing what works for you, for your organization, for your projects, for your vendors and suppliers. Heck, you may find some really cool vendors out there that you didn't even know existed that sell you cheaper material at a higher quality. So there's, and that impact that local community more. So I think start at wherever you're comfortable, and then you can progress from there. Remember, progress versus perfection. We are not expecting perfection out of any of our members, because we're not expecting it from ourselves or this program. We've never been perfect, even in our other sections. So that's why the sections change as we grow, as our builders grow, and as our market grows.
Agreed. All right. So I see a few Built Green verifiers on the call. Would you guys like to add any questions that you may have before proceeding on with clients that you may have to work with in the future, or any other people outside of verifiers? Any additional questions, last minute thoughts? Looks like we got about 15 minutes before we can wrap up.
Can you talk a little bit about what your expectations are for verifying those kinds of credits? Because that's from asking, if you're asking the verifiers, that's kind of where we come in terms of taking a look at it, potentially facilitating it during early design, but quite often not necessarily so.
Yeah, so we tried to, in the new format of like the single family checklist, you'll see it. And again, a lot of these credits are identical. I know, Catherine, you generally are working on multifamily projects. So if you jump over to the single family interim handbook, every credit has a format that says when it's verified and the performance requirement. And we tried to lay out exactly what you need to, like, what kind of documentation, what sort of elements on that document we're looking for. Now, some of it might be, we had to leave some flexibility in. So like the diverse teams is sort of a like open-ended, you need to kind of give us a narrative. Some of it is, like we mentioned in the presentation earlier, a Gantt chart that shows, the goals, the action steps you're making, those measurable performance and progress. One thing we really tried to build in is there are some project specific that you'll have to replicate with each project, but there's a lot of credits that can be applied over multiple projects over a calendar year, meaning that you're not having to do some of these really large implementation sort of items every single project. You can utilize those same actions across multiple projects because they have larger impacts that aren't necessarily project specific. So like recruitment activities, if you go and, mentoring activities, those are longer term, not necessarily project specific. So those can be applied over multiple things. As far as verifier documentation, it really depends on the credit. Some of the universal design and community connectivity are going to be like visually verified with a photograph. It may be included in, the overall interior shots that you're taking, or landscaping kind of project site photos. For the plans, we're really looking at, those measurable items with their goal statements written out, so that, and sort of showing the thought that they put behind each item. So we kind of use the example of a Gantt chart, because that kind of shows progression over time and when they plan to like actually implement those actions. Let's see, what are some other things? Some of them is going to be, so for work hours, we've requested essentially lists of, you know, names, their labor class, and like what zip code they reside in. We do not want like confidential payment information or like their actual address, but we want to see like how many hours they worked, that we can confirm they were in a priority zip code, and you know, that they were an actual person. So usually a name is attached to that. We will not share those documents, just in case anyone is wondering. We do share checklists, but we don't typically share documentation that goes along with those checklists if a homeowner like in the future asks for it. So those sort of employment documentations won't be anywhere but for verification. And then a lot of these will just sort of be written narratives that need to be written, and kind of just showing that narrative of what was done, how was it done, and then like what was the outcome.
Great, thanks. That's helpful.
But we tried to be really explicit because we know that sometimes it's just like, well, how the whole question of like, how do you meet it? And then like, what do our verifiers need to actually like check? We tried to think about that and provide those answers.
All right, are there any closing questions that the group has or anything that they'd like to ask Sonja or Patricia before we conclude? Got about 9 more minutes. All right, well, it looks like we don't have any final answers. Sonja and Patricia, thank you so much for answering those questions that we had for you. If you guys have any additional questions, feel free to email us on the Built Green website, or builtgreen@mbaks.com, for any additional questions that you have for Sonja on this section. And we thank you guys for coming to today's class.
Thank you, Patty, so much.